everybody. I know there's some people still trickling in. It's getting to be the end of the day. Some people might already be checked out. So thank you for coming to my session. I appreciate it. Today's session is going to be communicating when stuff is going wrong. And I'm going to jump into the about me right away because I have two special guests that I want to present. So about me, personally, I have a beautiful, fierce 13-year-old daughter named Annika. And I have a handsome 5-month-old son named Charlie. And I wanted them to be a part today. So here's Charlie, and here's Annika. And with Charlie, his sisters Rowan and Ava are there as well. So thank you for letting them be a part. I'll see you guys later. Bye, baby Charlie. Bye, Annika. He's totally not impressed. I'll see you later. Thank you. Yep. All right.
He's trying to communicate because things are going wrong.
Yes. His are like usually really loud cries, which isn't as sociably acceptable when we're adults. Okay, this is me. So professionally, I work here at Best Buy under the Web Operations org. Specifically, I lead the team for the associate-facing web operations. So what does that mean? We support the applications and services that our business users use to make up the content and data that you see on bestbuy.com. Really fortunate, I love my team, I love working here at Best Buy, and I have home field advantage for my first speaking gig in a really long time. So that is nice. For context today, a lot of this is coming from my experience working in web operations and also my experience in emergency management. So my degree is a 2-year degree in emergency management, and that's where I've drawn a lot of my best practices. So today we're going to talk about what is going on in our brain during those stressful, oh my gosh, something is going wrong moments. Then we're going to talk about what can we do before communicating in the middle of things going wrong, and then following up with the communication after the thing that has gone on is resolved. So what's going on in our brain? We have adrenaline. Most of you are familiar with this. It's the fight or flight hormone. It's telling us, boom, a stressful situation is here. So 15 minutes before I spoke, I was like, oh my gosh, am I going to fail? I was kind of freaking out a little bit, and then I was like, oh, that's just the adrenaline running. It's largely responsible for those immediate reactions, so that might feel like the pounding heart, the tense muscles, the faster breath, and the sweating. Anybody ever get those things? Yeah, me too. Next is a hormone similar to adrenaline. This is released from the glands, and it also comes from the brain, and it is for arousal. So it gets your blood pumping, your heart pounding, and it maybe gives you the shakes. Does anybody else get the little shakes? Yes, so do I. And another reason why I get the shakes is when I don't eat breakfast and I only drink a bunch of coffee. And then I go into a meeting, which is like not stressful, and I'm shaking and I'm trying to explain to them, like, I'm not nervous, I just haven't had breakfast yet. And it makes it really difficult when there's a caribou right on campus here. And then we have cortisol. So that's commonly known as the stress hormone. We've heard a lot about this, but it shuts down all the unnecessary functions so we can direct all of our energy for the stressful situation at hand. And then it should release and go down and go back to your normal state. Sometimes when you have a really rough week in web operations, the cortisol never goes back down to normal. It just stays at a high level. Any comments, questions on that? Awesome. So before communicating, this is a nice time because this is the part where you actually have time to kind of collect your thoughts, to think things through, because when you're in the middle of an incident, there isn't that much of a luxury. So something I've learned is to know myself. Really do that self-touchy-feely work, because if I understand how I respond under stress, and when I respond how things are going wrong, I can do a better job communicating. So that's why I geeked out and learned about all the hormones and the things that were going on in my brain, because I wanted to better understand why was I shaking, why was I getting nervous, or why would I talk really, really fast before going into a stressful situation. So for me, it's really helped to get to know myself better and all those like weird quirks I do before stressful things happen. Knowing my motives. This is especially true if I'm going into a meeting with maybe a business team to explain an issue. I like to check my motives at the door. Am I going in there to be like, look how smart I am, I'm gonna just throw out a bunch of technical jargon at you? Am I going in there to be like, you did wrong, you messed up, you screwed up? Or am I going in with like authentically saying like, hey, how can I help you? How can we collaborate better? Because typically if my motives are driven off of my ego, the meeting never ends really well. It's never been a positive thing. So I always try to check my motives for what I'm trying to do prior to communicating. And then I try to know what I'm trying to accomplish. If I just go into a meeting and not have an idea of what I'm trying to talk to with somebody, everybody just kind of leaves like, what was the purpose of that? And those meetings are super annoying, so I try not to do that with people. So just knowing what's the goal of talking with this person, with this team, and when I want them to walk away, I want them to think of these two things. Next piece that's really important for me in my line of work is knowing my tribes. So I need to understand my business users, build a relationship with them, understand what makes them tick, what's important to them. I need to understand the people that they work with. So for example, we work with our e-commerce partners here. They work with the merchants here. If I can understand what it's like in their world, I can do a better job communicating to them based upon what their needs are. It's really easy for me to get sucked up in my own little technical world where my day-to-day stuff is. But if I get to know all the people that are interconnected at the company, I can do a much better job communicating. And if I do that ahead of time, it makes communicating during the incident so much easier. So I'm very purposeful about getting to know the tribes of the different people that my teams work with and understanding what's important to them. Knowing my stuff. Where this is important is I need to understand the applications I support. That's pretty important. And it sometimes goes to the wayside because when an incident is happening, it's sort of like a bad time to know about your app if you don't know anything ahead of time. So we do our best to our ability to understand our app. How does it work? What are the impacts? So we can do a better job communicating in the middle of an incident that's going wrong. And another piece of that is knowing how my stuff affects a tribe. So if XYZ is broken on the website or is broken in one of the tools, how does that impact the creative team and what they're trying to accomplish? Because if I can isolate those components, I know how to word it to them in a way that makes sense in their world, and I know, okay, this is a really big deal for them. This is gonna be escalated to the VP level, SVP level. I need to know this. Or I can be like, yep, this is something that they can live with. That's why it's really important for us to understand each little component of what the app does and how it's important to our business users. And know that you don't know it all, and that's okay too. I'm very open with people. I'll say I don't have all the answers. A common question I get is, we're launching this huge project on the site. Can you promise me that all systems are gonna be okay? We have, I don't even know how many systems here at Best Buy, and I say, I wish I could, our stuff is really great, but I don't know it all, and I make that really transparent to people, because it's not about me, it's not about my ego. At the end of the day, it's about what we can do to make for a great customer experience. And then just breathe, which is really frustrating, because when you're in the middle of a situation and someone's like, oh, you know, just breathe. I'm like, no, there's a really complex answer for why I feel this way. So I just try to remind myself to breathe, slow down all those chemicals that are going on in my brain, and just take those deep belly breaths. Has anybody ever gotten to the point where you've become aware of how tense you are during a meeting? And they're like, people are nodding. You might not be able to see, but there are people nodding, so I'm not crazy. Any questions or feedback on things of this? Yes?
So, does coffee help or not help?
It does not help me. It does not. As I had this. I was getting that and I was like, oh, that's a really great idea to do before your presentation, but it's never really been helpful. And when I was pregnant, I had to have decaf. Yeah, it was pretty rough. And my son is very, very calm. He's a very even-keeled baby, and I'm like, did you come out of my body? Are you my son? So, because I'm definitely a little bit more higher energy than him. All right. So this is where things get really hard. This is communicating in the middle of things going wrong. And this is tough. When people first start joining my team and they have their first incident and they have to send out an incident alert, I remember my first one just about hit send. It's really hard because I can guarantee you, no matter how close you get to perfecting your communication process, every time somebody will come back and say, why didn't you say X, Y, Z? Every time in a post-incident review, in a conversation, in a meeting, somebody will always bring that up. So I've learned not to take it personal. So I'm going to do this more from the lens of incidents here. Another really great tip that I got from my mentor is do your best to make sure your boss is not surprised. So if I know something, kind of going back, if I know something that's happened that's going to impact the people who I support, and it's likely that it's going to escalate, like up to their VP, then to my boss, I will give them a heads up and say, hey, XYZ happened, the team is aware of it, we're working on it, it might come your way. Because those of you, have you ever been caught by surprise where someone's like, is this happening? Has anybody been like, your boss asks you that? Yeah. And then you have no idea that it's happening? Super awkward feeling. So I always try to get one step ahead so my bosses know that it's going on. For an incident, when do we send an alert here and what do I train my teams on? Obviously when the issue is reproducible, when we can do it over and over again. If you can't log in once to the app and you only get one ticket on it, we're not going to send out an incident because then it just becomes noise and people start to ignore them. So after we can confirm there's an issue, we try to send it out as soon as possible. How? Here at Best Buy, and I'll show you that, we use an operations dashboard center, so it gets sent from a separate mailbox. Previously, we did send it from our personal accounts. If you do that, I recommend putting the distro list in the BCC because somebody will reply all and say, can you tell me what happened? And then it's going to be this huge email chain of triaging and people trying to figure out what happened. So my recommendation is putting people in the BCC for the incident alert. Who does it go to? What we've done is we've predefined if there's an AF issue, it goes to a little bit lesser of an audience. If we have a big site outage issue, that audience is already predefined by a distro list and has specific people in it. Makes it a little bit easier when you're in the middle of an incident so you don't have to try to figure out who are all the teams that I need to send this to. And the wording. This is probably the biggest challenge that we have. How do you word it? How technical do you go? My general guideline that I go by, knowing the people I work with, is I try to word it in a way that my 13-year-old will understand. And I do not mean that in a condescending way, because you have people who are new to the company that are going to get that alert. So if I have a bunch of acronyms in it, they're not going to understand how that impacts their work. So I try to make it as high level as possible so anybody can read the alert and understand and get it. So there's a lot of words on this slide, but basically something else that I have found really helpful is tried and true wordings and sentences that work. I just copy and paste them on a wiki page and tell my team to use them because when we send something out and we communicate something, I'm not communicating it as Sarah Heitkamp, it's coming from our ops org. So if we can keep it as consistent as possible, that's desirable. You don't want somebody to know oh, Joe wrote that alert and Sally wrote that alert, because you can tell people's personality on their email. So we try to keep them as sort of generic as possible. The first thing is just state that the ops teams are working on it and we're troubleshooting the issue. A lot of times people just want to know you're working on their issue and that it's being acknowledged. There's nothing more frustrating when something's happened and you don't have any idea what's going on. Is somebody working on it? Is somebody not working on it? So just getting that out right away. Yes, the app isn't functioning, we are working on it. Obviously only fact-based impacts to include and any known impacts. Something here for wider issues is we try to determine if orders are impacted. Our site reliability engineering team does a great job of that. But specifically with AF stuff, I will always kind of call out the ability to transact on the site hasn't been impacted. Anything that I know that will alert my business users or get them worried, I try to take out that fear and worry. Did you have a question? Yes.
What's AF? Yeah.
Oh, I just talked about not using acronyms. Associate facing. Associate facing. So those are the tools that our business users log into. Thank you. Any other questions? All right. And then I guess we divide it by customer facing then, like our site reliability engineering team handles that. And then we'd say communicate that updates will be provided as they become available. Obviously we don't want long gaps, like 6-7 hour gaps, because we're gonna get pinged anyways. We do not communicate an estimated time to resolution. You're setting yourself up to fail. In most cases. I mean, you could do like it might be resolved in an hour, but if it's not, you're gonna have angry people. So we typically do not do that, yes?
Do you say like the next update would be in 50 minutes?
We typically do not. Sometimes, I think maybe for the higher severity issues they will, but our team typically does not, because I don't know how in-depth we're gonna have to be technically troubleshooting something, and if we're gonna have the ability to deliver on that promise. Yes? Not a public facing, we have an internal one though. Yes.
What if, do you have where you are given a problem by a very, very important person in the company, and they give you also a deadline for you want them to do it? How do you handle that?
That's a great question. So if it is an action, if they say, hey, this is happening and it's not working and it's only a localized thing, we won't even send out an alert for it. And if they say they want it done by a certain day, that I can probably do an issue summary. But we get like an executive that might say, hey, I can't do XYZ on the site. If it's not widely impacting, we wouldn't send out an alert. Did that answer your question?
No, just not exactly, because I want to know how you handle where you're actually given a deadline. That from an executive to say they want it done by the end of the day. How do you what do you do to get that resolved by the end of the day?
Typically our first priority is resolving it as quickly as possible, so we're not given a deadline. Because that's our first thing, is like how can we reduce mean time to resolution. So from detection to actual resolution, it's never gone on longer than a day. I've never seen that before. I think the longest incident I might have seen recently, and I have some people in here, is like maybe 8 hours, maybe they're not in there. They're the smart people. Maybe like 4 hours. So if we have an issue lasting longer than that, we have a bigger problem. I've never experienced that yet though. Yes?
Is this sending out email when you get an incident to potentially affected parties?
Yes.
A habit your team's in, or is there like a button in your ticket or your incident dashboard, or how do you actually manage that process?
I will show you that. That's coming up. Yes. It used to be an email, but we've made that process a little bit smoother now. There is another question. Yes.
Is there a reason why you don't have a public-facing status page? Or like, what's the reasoning behind not having a public-facing status page?
Some of these things they would be invisible to the customer, so you don't even know that they're happening. I guess the way you would know a major issue is happening on their website is you would get the splash page that says we're unavailable. But we've designed our site in a way where you can still navigate it, but right now I don't know. That's a really great question. I don't know if it's been vetted out, like what we would use that for. Any other questions? All right. Obviously, if there's a lapse in time, we send out another alert. We don't communicate ETR. And we try to get clear and accurate than speed. Again, I don't want to just blast something out to a bunch of people and have it inaccurate and then have to go back and correct myself. So that's when I try to take a breath. What's going on? What happened? I try to ask clarifying questions, and then I get that information and we send that out. And so this is the last piece that we always put at the end of alert. You know, it's returned to normal. This will be the final update on the incident, and I'll show you what that looks like. It closes the incident out so people know it's done, it's good, we're great. Another thing that we practice here is that we do not send out root cause. The reason why I do not have my team do that is because we are humans, we make mistakes, and sometimes somebody makes a mistake. I am not going to blast that out to hundreds of people that XYZ happened, because they're gonna know the team that did it. And that person is not gonna feel good, that team is not gonna feel good. We do post-incident reviews where it's reviewed there, but it is not blasted out to a bunch of people. This team made this mistake. I don't know if that would be helpful for anybody. All right, any other questions about incident Another tip that I try to do for my team is when they're technically triaging an issue, I say, if you get questions or you need me to run interference, please let me know. So they don't have business users pinging them for updates. I say just direct them to me to give them the space. One of my favorite analogies I like to use when people are asking for updates is I say, okay, you're hanging out with your family and you have grandpa with you and you're eating at Buca's. And grandpa goes boom and he falls down, heart attack. When the paramedics get there, they can either work to get your grandpa up, stabilized, doing better, or they can stop and give you updates every 5 minutes. So our first priority is to get things up and running and then give you the information as it becomes available. We want to stabilize and then communicate. It's not a like, hey, we're ignoring you. It's a, we want to get things resolved for you. And that kind of just goes back to building really good relationships with your business users and building trust so they don't feel like you're withholding information to them. So after the issue has been resolved, there's sort of two levels. Sometimes we have things that we send out, and then sometimes there's something that, to your point, doesn't warrant an alert. But something went really wrong, and somebody somewhere in the company is going to want a summary. So I'm going to start with the first one that we do, like the post-incident reviews. These are pretty standard across many companies. They're really intense for emergency management. This is literally the template that we've developed and that we use on my team. A summary. A one line, thinking of it as an email subject line of this is what went wrong. Why? What was the impact? Internal customers, external customers, any associated support tickets. That's so we can go back and reference it. And then how do we fix it? Sometimes we can do some short-term workarounds while we're still working on the long-term resolution, so we'll put that there. And then we'll do a long-term fix, like what fixed this permanently. And then just like any postmortem, we do what did we learn? We practice blameless postmortems here. I think, are you guys familiar with that concept? Yes. If you're not, no problem, I can explain. Everyone's good on that one?
Can you explain?
I would love to. So how we practice postpartum, you can tell I just had a baby. Postmortem, blameless postmortems is that we go in with not to point fingers, not to say you did this wrong, but just to figure out what happened. Because if you start going in with pointing fingers, people are going to withhold information because they're going to afraid that they're going to get in trouble. And then we can't get better. And it's just, be a good human and don't go blame people. If you have the same thing happen over and over again, that can be a different conversation for process improvement. But that's what we try to do, so everybody can come together and collaborate. There's a better way to explain that if you Google it. There's some really good articles out there, but that's the gist of it. Can we prevent this? Can we detect it better? Can we fix it faster? So all teams are involved in this. From an ops perspective, we'll say, hey, can we fix this faster? Could we have detected it sooner? The answer might be no. The answer might be yes. This just gets us to a better place. Any question on this? All right. This is, to answer your question, we had something go really, really wrong. It didn't warrant an ops alert to go out, so I will send an email recap, probably to one of the leaders in the business who was impacted. I'll CC my leaders. Same thing. Here was the issue. And this is the way I imagine it. How many of you look on emails between meetings and you're walking? Nobody? How many people use your phone to awkwardly check emails when you see somebody you don't want to talk to? Because I do it. I try to imagine that my boss or who's ever reading this email is quickly walking in between a meeting. And do you ever get that long email where you read the first 3 sentences and then you're just checked out? You're like, I'm not going to finish this. That's what I try to imagine, that they're reading it on a device, so I can give them 3 bullet points so they can just, it gives them enough information to speak to it, and if they have more questions, they can ask me later. Sounds like a very simple thing to do. It can sometimes take me an hour to trim it down into that concise thing, like what matters for them. But it's incredibly helpful for them, and then when they need to go speak to their different business leaders about it, they have their speaking points. The other thing that I'm fully aware of, and I don't know if this is just like a jaded support thing, is that emails can be forwarded and anything I say can and could be used against me at a later time. So I make sure everything is super factual because that email is probably going to get forwarded out. And I'm, again, representing my area of the org, so I want to make sure that I'm wording things correctly, that I'm not saying, oh, this stupid person did X, Y, Z, make sure your org works better, because emails can easily get forwarded. I put the resolution in there, the workaround, the cause, and any outstanding action items. A lot of people, they'll be tolerant of like, okay, this issue happened. But they also want to know one of the main questions I get is, well, what are we going to do to prevent this from happening again? So I think being fair to say, okay, here are the action items, these are the follow-ups that we can do to try to make sure that this won't happen again. And this is collaboration across a lot of teams. I think a challenge that I've seen working in web operations and even in emergency management is something goes wrong, right? And maybe it has some high visibility. Everybody wants to be the one that fixes it and says, look what I did. So it's collaborating with people to get to a place, because sometimes you'll get multiple teams write summaries and they'll have like multiple different causes. So ahead of time determining like who's responsible for sending that communication out. That's something that's found helpful. I don't know, like, have you guys ever had maybe a leader in your company point out an issue that's wrong and then all of a sudden everybody wants to solve that issue? Yeah, oh yeah. Even if it's like a one random off issue, like I solved the CEO's issue, you know. So sometimes that'll happen too, depending who raises the issue. That's how many people will kind of rush to fix it. Yes?
Yeah, so this is great, and this makes all kinds of sense. When you have an issue has happened, the cause was found, it was resolved, and you've recovered. So you can send that report.
Yes.
I guess a couple other variations that I'm curious if you have thoughts on. If it is, unfortunately, a recurring issue, what additional information might you add there? And then also in the case where the root cause is not 100% understood, what would you do in that type of communication?
Those are two really great questions. The incident communication that we send out, it just says it was resolved. We don't go into any more detail there. The actual PIR that was sent out, so the first one was, what do we do when it's the same issue happening over and over again?
Yeah.
What I most frequently see is not necessarily the same issue happening over and over again. I see the same symptom, different causes. But that's even a bigger problem because to our business users, they see it as the same issue. So that's where face-to-face conversation comes in helpful, and this is one of my favorite analogies. You have a cough, I have a cough. Same symptom, looks the same. You have a cough because you are like a pack-a-day smoker. I have a cough because I'm sick. Two very different causes. So if I'm working with a team, I try to be really specific about that, and where we really get hit hard is if we see an issue with the same symptom happen multiple times. So I try to be really clear about that to them. That's a really good call out because that's something that happens frequently. And then when we don't have logging or we can't track down what the issue is, my team, like, how often do we have that where it takes a while to get to the information? That does happen. Sometimes we just say, hey, we need more time to analyze things. And then other times it's just being transparent and saying, here's how far we went. We don't 100% know the root cause, but this is the information that we have. I don't know if I've seen a lot of times that we haven't been able to get to root cause. Very, very rarely for major things. Those were really good call outs though. Yes?
So do you store the root cause in a repository on SharePoint somewhere?
We use a wiki, yes. Sometimes, depending on the sensitivity of it, we might lock it down to certain individuals who can view it. But again, we are an open, we want everybody to be able to learn best practices. Yes?
Let's say that the issue had a major customer impact.
Yes.
And you also need to update them. But you're not obviously the one talking to them. You're working with you're working with the public relations team, or maybe your community management, et cetera. What's the best practice for taking something that's technical, the issue, and making it consumer friendly?
That's a really good question. On the global level, full disclosure, I'm not as familiar with how like my department would work with Best Buy's PR department. I can't speak on that part. I can speak on what do I do to translate technical to our business users. Is that sort of like how do I,
Sure.
like, okay, and message queue failed, right? My business users don't know what an MQ is. So how do I translate that to them? Does that sound like your question?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just like, how would you say the best way is to partner with the teams that actually need to say, like, I don't understand what went wrong, but I know kind of symptomatic change that happened. What would be the best way for them to feel equipped to answer any questions they have?
Oh, and they have, okay, I see, I think I get what you're saying. So okay. So if I'm communicating, like, here's what went wrong, the e-commerce people are going to have to go tell their merchant partners, right? So what I do, again, that comes back to knowing them and understanding them and their business and being able to word it that way. So I can say, this is what happened on the site, here's what was specific to you, and then they can go, I take out all the technical jargon, usually, and I'm trying to think of a good way to describe it. I have examples, but I obviously can't share them. But it's a valid thing, and that's something that we really struggle with, because they shouldn't have to understand all the stuff that's happening. It should just work for them. But I think the best thing I can say is it goes back to understanding them and their world, because it's easier for me to translate what that means to them.
I think it's really fair.
Yeah. Yes?
How do you involve the legal or the HR?
These are all internal. So as far as like external stuff, like we don't have to have any legal thing for internal communicating or PR. I don't have any personal involvement to that, so I can't speak to that. Any other questions?
I have a question.
Yes.
Yeah, so you talked about, you have good relationships with your business partners, so you can communicate the effective outage effectively to them. What happens if an outage is affecting multiple business units? Do you tailor separate messages to each of them, or a single message? Kind of split the difference, or what?
That's a really good question, because we often, that's an excellent question. So our alerts only go to, within how this works here is to the e-commerce partners. It does not go across the entire org. So the e-commerce partners, then they have their people, like their marketing people, their merchandising people, their finance people, they communicate it to them. Our alert does not get sent to a merchant, to somebody in finance. It's specifically the teams that we're working with really closely. Because the merchants aren't in that app, it wouldn't be meaningful for them. So that's a really good question, though. Okay. Which brings me to the Q&A part. Yeah. Yes.
So back to the question on coffee.
Yes. Yes.
What is good? Not Red Bull, right?
It's funny because during holiday we used to just have like a bunch of energy drinks. You could see I don't have a picture of it, but this sounds really corny, but part of communicating and working well with business teams is taking care of yourself. It kind of goes back to knowing yourself. And if I show up to work and I'm super tired, which obviously happens because I have a 5-month-old now, and I'm super stressed, my ability to communicate is really going to deteriorate. And sometimes, I'll watch my team too, and if they're in the middle of a technical issue and I know it's stressing them out, I'll just send out the alert on their behalf so they can continue to work on the issue. Or I know my team's strength. If I know somebody is going to be impatient with explaining the issue, then I might send somebody else who has that strength, or I'll go do it. So I know your question. I don't know if that answered your question, but. All right, I said that. Yeah, go ahead.
How is the parallels of raising 2 kids and things going wrong in that environment compared to things going wrong in the professional environment?
It's like the same. I think one of the parts is just keeping people calm. Doing that PR perspective, one of the things in emergency management that we learned is that there's so much stuff going on all the time that we don't want to know, right? If they told us everything that was going on, you don't want to know, you wouldn't want to go outside. So it's learning like when to alert people to a real issue and when it's not an issue, and that balance. And then again, just explaining in terms that everybody could understand. And I can do a quick demo of like what an alert looks like for us. So somebody asked, this is our ops status dashboard. When we send an alert, it gets sent from here. And then I have a copy of what one looks like. It will look like this in somebody's email box. So this was an internally built tool. And you can just see I actually just sent one on the 31st. We had an app that was just unavailable for a small blip in time. That's me. So at 2:30, we were alerted that an app became unresponsive. This is literally what we sent out. And then 10 minutes later, we recovered. It was now available. Anybody can go back and see this. And then this is what it looks like to our business users. I'm on a Windows machine, I apologize. There we go. So you can see when it was originally sent, and then when it's resolved, it'll say closed. So it all stays as one part of the thread. And then if you click on the subject line, it'll take you to that dashboard so people can historically see what happened. Obviously, all the severities are defined ahead of time. So that was something I would actually recommend before communicating as well, determine what your severity is.
Is Op Center a homegrown tool or is it a third party?
It's homegrown. We built it. It was in-house built. Yes.
So the content that you shared just around, right, this is your brain on stress and all of that. I feel like that, packaging that well and having that be part of some standard training at any given company would be a huge benefit. It like ties in my mind to some of the stuff we're starting to do around diversity and inclusion and how we do trainings on unconscious bias and just ways that your brain works that you aren't necessarily aware of. And if everybody becomes aware of this is how we work when we're stressed, we could be watching for it in ourselves and mitigate it a little bit. We can recognize it in a colleague and cut them a little slack or take it with a grain of salt because we can tell that they've got the, this chemical is running them in circles right now.
Yes.
So it just feels like a really valuable thing to just be part of standard training at pretty much any company.
Yes, I love that. That was sort of one of my main reasons is like I just geeked out at night because I couldn't understand. I was like, why am I responding this way or why am I so angry? And also understanding my triggers. Because somebody asked like what happens when the same issue happens over and over again. That's one of my triggers. So if I know it's something that like, oh, why did this happen again? I can take a step back and be like, hey, okay, how can I walk through this okay? And then in retrospect, as I've grown and I've learned, I've seen other situations where I haven't handled myself as well. And I've had professional relationships deteriorate because maybe I didn't stand on my own because I was so scared or so uptight about what was going on. I didn't claim my own power and say like, hey, I'm not cool with how this happened. I just went in autopilot. Yes?
This topic of like stress and people's individual responses to stress seems related to me to this concept of the blameless postmortem, which is something we don't do where I work. But I was wondering if you could speak a little bit to how you keep them blameless. Because I imagine as you're having a conversation about what went wrong, right, and people are sharing information, at some point, yeah, maybe somebody did make a mistake or a team dropped the ball or something. How does that play out? How does the blamelessness play out in real life where, especially when if it's occurring to you like, oh, I screwed up and the stress hormones kick in or like the shame, kicks in. How do you keep conversation open and keep people from like going down the blame spiral?
That's a really good question, and I think it depends on who's sort of like leading the postpartum or postmortem. Oh my gosh, postmortem. I should have just had baby Charlie in like a Bajorn here and just like had him with me as I was. I think it depends who's leading it. For me, best practices has been by the way that I lead. If I come into the meeting, one of the first things I will acknowledge is I'm like, I know this interrupted your work. I'm sorry about that. And that sets the tone for people. And then it's highly individualistic. So I have some users that I know, like, they'll reach out to my team and they'll hashtag process fail. So they know that there was an issue. And then I reinforce that. So I say, hey, I really appreciate you calling out and saying, like, we did this wrong. And I think as you continue to build those relationships, it becomes easier and easier for teams to do. But in the beginning, building that trust is really, really hard. And it takes a lot of work on both sides and a lot of patience. So I don't think there's an easy answer for that, but building that culture is just how I lead and making sure that my team knows that and people can see like, hey, I'm not gonna go after you. It's sort of like with my children, if I can kind of get my daughter to admit to me she didn't do her chores, like, that's helpful. Did that kind of answer your question? I don't know if it, because you're just wondering like how to cultivate that culture?
Well, and I mean, that's, I think, kind of the answer to the question. It's like, it's not just a thing that happens, it's the culture has to support it.
Yes.
People need to see that we can, dig in and really investigate and
And sometimes the way I pitch it too is I say like, I'm excited to find out what caused this because can we put a feature into one of the products to prevent it? So sometimes that's the way I key it up because then people are more willing to say like, yeah, this is what happened. I'll try to say like, can we throw this in a process book? Can we, ideally we want to develop products that don't allow people to like make those types of mistakes, but that's something I do as well. Yes, another question?
How do you communicate with the engineers or with other employees who are working on fixing the incident? Do you post on Slack every once in a while, or do you actually talk to them personally and see what's going on?
We have an incident HipChat room that is open to anybody who has HipChat, so people can jump in there, they can copy and paste graphs, charts, things like that. That's how we do our communication here. If it's a wider enterprise issue, we do the bridge calls. Yes.
I just want to follow on the blameless culture, like building that up. And I'm sure there's a lot of great strategies. This is either really obvious or maybe it's a little bit subtle. But the concrete thing, the agency, concentrate on the future agency and not the past. So the thing happened, and someone should feel free to confess. I did this thing, and it was a total mistake. It was a total mess up. And what has been said here is like, perfect. That's an opportunity. That's an opportunity for improved monitoring. That's an opportunity for process improvement. Like to dwell on, or even worse, why did you make that mistake?
Yeah.
Like, just acknowledge that happened. But what is going to happen is we are going to become more resilient and stronger as a result of this. This is testing the system. It's not anything you can inflict on yourself intentionally outside of the lab or the control room. But like, I just think it's always about driving forward and improvement. These people have a tendency to dwell on what they've done wrong. And I do. Another thing that I don't know which is good or not, but for anyone who plays like, WoW or whatever. So there's like tanks. Sometimes I like, you said you're sorry right away.
Yeah.
So whoever's in charge of driving the conversation, lead with like, you know what, this didn't go right. And it's like, either at minimum sorry, or it's just like, I work with a small team, so I like to just remove it and say, it's my fault. Let's just assume it's my fault. Now, how are we going to help like figure this thing out and make it better? Because any energy that is being spent dwelling on the past is lost productivity on actually fixing it and making it better.
Absolutely. And I love what you said about that because sometimes if I go in the meeting and I sit down, I'm right away like, yep, we made a mistake. People don't know what to do because they expected that whole meeting to grill me and to deny that there was a mistake. But if I just sit down like, yep, this is what it was, then they're more open to have a better conversation. That's been helpful. Yes.
Okay, just gonna jump in on the
absolutely.
thing too. Like two pieces about it that I think are helpful because I'm really involved in trying to get good practice going with this in our company right now. So there's the cultural piece. The culture has to support it, and I think a good way to instill that is have reinforce in your culture the value of learning. The company that learns the fastest is the company that will succeed. And if you just have that as a basic cultural piece, it's easier to sell it and get it in there at that point than, hey, let's learn from this because something just broke and things are on fire. If it's just generally, hey, let's learn quickly, and whoever learns and contributes to learning is helping us win, then it's just another aspect of that. This is another opportunity for us to learn, so whoever helps us learn by being open and being vulnerable is helping us win, and that's something to celebrate. And then the second piece is, there is the obvious, this thing got done wrong, and then always look for what are the environmental contributors to that. What is it about our environment that would help you make that decision that made something break? Is it because we're trying to move too fast? Is it because we don't take enough time to get the appropriate safety nets? Is it rather than just stopping at this person did this thing which made something break?
So can I comment on that? Because that's so I'm on an operations team also.
You are?
I work for Sports Engine.
Oh, cool.
And I'm on the platform operations team. We try to not. We don't actually allow for root cause.
Oh.
We talk about contributing conditions because root cause allows too much finality. We work in a world of complex systems, and to say that one thing is the problem is like spectacularly, but that's usually only one symptom of a greater issue.
Yeah, I like that.
So
Contributing
we try to find
factors?
multiple, contributing conditions instead of a root cause, and we never try to identify the cause because, yeah, like I said, cause is a state of finality. That's my same feeling on blame and on like someone being an individual actor kind of thing. That in and of itself is also faulty because then you're like, oh, this person did this thing, that's the reason why this happened. John Allspaw talks about like instead of asking why, ask how. And so it's like, how did this come to be instead of why did it come to be?
Yeah.
And there's like, a lot of people talk about like the 5 whys, and John Allspaw says, no, how about we talk about the unlimited hows? You just continue to ask how, because like, you end up thinking that you've come to a conclusion. Sorry,
I like
I'm
that.
getting, like super.
No, I think that's really, it's great because I think when some people, when they want a root cause analysis, there is sometimes that thought of like, then I know who I can go back to and yell at.
Yeah.
You know, so I really like the contributing factors idea and the curiosity rather than, you know, and sometimes I'll ask people if they want, people will ask for root cause analysis on lesser impacting issues and I'm like, well, what is your goal with this information? That's really helpful too. Yes.
I agree with the comment about complexity. A real problem from a decade plus ago, a number of planograms disappeared in the store and worked through, it took days to recover, maybe weeks, and come up with a cause, and it turned out the buyer used the application and deleted it. So from the IT side, user error, right? My boss, who was really forward thinking, said the problem is we can't allow an application to allow a user to do something stupid or something that they don't want. They need to have a checkpoint. So sometimes it's like, yeah, that's exactly why it happened, except it's not exactly why it happened. It happened because we had a fragile application.
Yeah.
Right. Nobody wants to be nobody wakes up in the morning and is like, I'm going to be the person that makes the website go down. Nobody intentionally does that. That's the other I try to remember is, yeah. That's true. It's true. Yes.
Any references you would recommend?
Off the top of, getting burnt many, many times. No, not off the top of my head. I think a lot of my experience is just in incident management in the public sector. They have a pretty structured way of doing this and having a separate PR person, but it's kind of boring, a lot of it to read through, to be honest. But no, not off the top of my head. I think every company too has a different way. Like some people might follow ITIL, really, really strict standards. I don't off the top of my head. If I think of some though, I'll let you know. Yes, I have one more question. Anybody dying? Yes, go ahead. Well.
Do you have any strategies for bringing people into this culture that it's foreign to? Whether it be somebody who your team might have accountability to who wants to play the game, or just a new person on the tech team who's like, oh my God, I crashed this one thing and I'm gonna get fired and it's all my fault.
So I think there's 2 pieces of that. There's somebody coming new to working in web operations and terrified the first time they have to send out an alert. And then as far as like a product team, maybe like bringing them on board, I don't have as much influence over that area. I feel like most people have experience, but when I bring on somebody new to my team, I just tell them, one of the first conversations I have with them is I'm like, you will fail. You will miss something, you'll send something out, it'll be incorrect. I'm just very honest with them and I tell them I would rather have you do that than always second guess yourself. I want you to be empowered. There's no reason for you to have to call me to say, can I do X, Y, Z or X, Y, you know, because you're gonna be on call at 2 a.m. in the morning. Frankly, I don't wanna get called at 2 a.m. in the morning. So it's partly selfish, but it is a really hard thing to do to ramp up people to feel comfortable being uncomfortable. It isn't easy at all. The other thing I remind them, the difference between emergency management and when I went through EMT training was that people die on that side of the world. Here, people aren't gonna die. They're gonna get frustrated. It's a big deal, but at the end of the day, nobody is going to die. And so I just try to bring some of that in. But it is a huge challenge of bringing people onto the team to work in that. And honestly, it takes a certain person Just like it takes, like, who wants to go run into a building on fire? It takes a certain personality to work in ops, as you guys probably know, or to work in technology. Yes?
Okay. I've got two things. Having worked at Best Buy and then at like Pages, which is like two completely different companies, now I'm at an enterprise SaaS company. One thing that was really different between all of those was when shit hits the fan, make sure that if you're at an enterprise company, make sure your biggest customers know that there's an issue and that you're working on it, even though that's like obvious, but like the touch point is much different. Sending them an email won't work, give them a call, because they will not, if they don't feel that human element, they'll bounce. Like they'll say there's an issue and they'll talk to their management about how like your service is reliable and then you won't be able to get back in. The second, a vehicle that we just use in Workiva to facilitate that culture is not like, hey, like one person describing what it is that the culture should be. It's getting the team in the room and asking them what it should be. And then you naturally get to the same spot. But when everyone contributes and puts the points up there, like we're going to be blame-free, but open to admit guilt. We're going to be fast and all these things. Instead of it just being one person who's saying, here's how we're going to roll, everybody buys into it. And it becomes a team and like kind of a collective, and you're not like, no one's going to point you out and blame. If someone does that, it's against the culture, and we kind of hold each other accountable to that. And that works really, really well for us. And I wanted to share that with everybody because it's nice to share when things work.
Thank you. Communicating is just a fascinating topic. There's people who go to school for it, they get degrees in it. There's tons of books at Barnes & Noble. I think a lot of it has helped me. Do people read books, right, anymore? Do they do it on their iPad? But what has helped me is just really getting to know myself as well. So I hope this was helpful. Thank you.